So I'm not a chiropractor or anything, but my first advice for anyone out there having any chronic back pain, I would suggest you don't put yourself in a situation where you might end up at Rikers Island for a few years or in prison for life in general. So anyway, my name's Jeremy, and in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about this case. Obviously, most people already knew what happened, so I'm not going to go into all the details or cover just the news. I'm going to give some of my opinions on how I think that this case is going to roll out in the conclusions. And one or two things that they haven't mentioned too much in the news yet that I think will be important for how this case rolls out. Obviously, it's just speculation. So I'll briefly go through the case real quick before I go into any conclusions. Luigi Mangione is from Baltimore, Maryland. So his family definitely came from big money. His grandfather had some country clubs, nursing homes, and a radio station, apparently. And Luigi was a valedictorian of his high school and later went on to get his bachelor's in computer science and his master's in engineering. So definitely a really bright kid. He had a good future ahead of him, for sure. But he had some medical problems. Since he was a kid, he had some problems with his back. And they got worse as he got older, especially after a surfing accident when he was in Hawaii a couple years ago. And so anyway, after he had this back surgery, he really started to withdraw from his friends and family more in those months, especially the last few weeks before he ended up shooting Brian Thompson, which he had planned for several weeks or several months. And he also didn't just have these back problems, he apparently has Lyme disease and some other issues. And he was even worried that these kinds of things could affect his intimate relationships in the future. So no doubt it has to be super depressing to deal with these issues in your early 20s when a lot of these things, to be honest, are things that most people deal with like when they're at least middle age or above. And so for these reasons, and probably some other things like maybe some of the things he learned in college or whatever, he has this huge disdain for the healthcare industry. And the largest healthcare provider is United Health. They're the largest company by revenue in the United States, and the CEO of that company is Brian Thompson. And so on December 4th, 2024, Brian was going to attend an annual United Healthcare investors meeting at the New York Hilton Midtown. And so he was staying at the Marriott nearby, and at 6:45 in the morning, he's going to go to this meeting, and Luigi Mangione comes up with a pistol from behind him and shoots him twice, once in the back and once in his leg. And within 30 minutes, Brian unfortunately passed away. And so at first, it looked like a pretty professional hit job when you see the first video. But later you see that there was some images where he had pulled his mask down and you could see possibly who it was. And he had gone to Starbucks and gotten coffee and things and threw them into the trash cans. So you know they would have like his DNA and things like that and fingerprints eventually. And so a few days after that, they knew his name but withheld that. But people had seen this partial image of his face in the media. And so after he had killed Brian Thompson, he made his way down to Philadelphia and then over towards Pittsburgh. And he was sitting in a McDonald's and someone recognized him there and called the police. And he was arrested for having the gun, fake IDs, and other things. And then, of course, in New York, he's charged with second-degree murder. So right at this time, he's actually in PA. And he was initially fighting extradition, but he just got a lawyer, and I think he'll end up in New York in the next few days. Obviously, he can't fight that forever anyway. And so he just hired this prominent lawyer, Karen Friedman Agnifilo. So she knows the court system there because she's worked in Manhattan for a lot of years. So this obviously will help him in some ways, but we all know it's going to be a tough case. So as we could imagine, he's probably going to plead not guilty under the reason of insanity. Which is going to be tough because he not only meticulously planned this for several weeks, he also had a short manifesto that was only about 3 pages, but he had a journal or a diary of, the events leading up to that for, several months or even several years. And so the prosecution is obviously going to try to use this to prove that this was, obviously premeditated for a long time. I don't know what the contents of that journal are. Obviously, if it shows the deterioration, into a madman or something, that might actually help the defense, but we don't know that information yet. So this back pain could have actually pushed him to have like a nervous breakdown or something. So that could be one issue. But another thing that's probably going to come up that hasn't been talked about a lot yet is that he apparently has Lyme disease, which can actually be quite serious depending on the timing of when you began treatment to fight against it, basically. And so this can include things like brain fog, irregular heartbeat, severe headaches, arthritis, swelling of the joints, heart and central nervous problems. And in really severe cases, you could become bipolar, have severe depression, and even become like schizophrenic or have like some psychotic break. So you're probably going to see that more in this case. And he apparently also had irritable bowel syndrome. So I don't know all the details of that, but I could imagine all of these things really were weighing on him big time. So his charge in New York is second-degree murder, which is a mandatory minimum of 15 years to life. So it doesn't mean you only do 15 years and you get out. That's the first time you could be up for parole. So he could still do life. And given the premeditated nature of the crime and having this manifesto and planning this out and an untraceable weapon, it doesn't look good for him. So he's probably looking more like, 25 or 30 years or more. So I'm surprised they didn't actually pursue a first-degree murder charge, which this would be the case in almost any other state in the United States. But New York's kind of special. First-degree murder in New York is like under special circumstances, like the victim is a police officer, a firefighter, public servant, like a judge. It was a commission of a serious crime, like a kidnapping. Someone was paid to commit the crime, etc. But it also has like, an intentional killing that was premeditated. So I'm actually kind of surprised he didn't get the first degree. Who knows if they'll change that in the future. But he is lucky that he's in New York, because if this case happened in like Florida or Texas in most places, like he would get life without parole and possibly the death penalty. So he's going to be charged in Manhattan, which is where Alvin Bragg is. He was elected for the county of New York, which is basically covers Manhattan. Generally, they're quite progressive and pretty light on crime in general. So that might work good for him in some ways. But the judge, as far as sentencing goes, is going to be under a lot of pressure to give him a harsh sentence, because if not, other people will feel compelled to, whack some CEO if they're only going to get like 10 or 15 years, for instance. So it's going to be kind of interesting how that plays out. So his best case scenario could be a hung jury. There's a lot of people out here that are very favorable to him. So if he has one person in that jury who, doesn't think he's guilty, or they don't agree on the circumstances, it could be a hung jury, and obviously could get tried again. But sometimes the second time around, they might lessen the charges. So that's obviously a scenario that could happen, but that only happens with about 10% of cases. There's obviously the chance that he could go for a plea deal. I think if they're going to offer him 20 years or less, he should take it. But I imagine because he's got the money to get a high-profile lawyer, he might fight it. And even if he does get a lighter sentence, like 15 years, when he goes to that parole board, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to oppose his release. I mean, you have his family, which includes his wife, who at the time they were separated, but she's obviously going to come out and speak for him. He's got 2 teenage sons now who will obviously come out. And he's probably got a lot of friends and family and coworkers that are going to come out for him. Because although people hate the healthcare industry, this guy apparently was like a pretty decent dude, despite the circumstances. And so I think, he's not going to get up for this first parole in 15 years, if that's going to be a possibility. But there's no doubt he was worried that his back or medical problems might ruin his relationships in the future. The sad thing is that I think there's going to be a lot of people in prison that are going to want to have relationships with him, whether he likes it or not. So the only good thing is that his family's got money, so I assume they're going to grease the wheels to like pay some mafia dudes to like make sure this dude is gets some protection, because otherwise he's going to have a lot more than back problems. So I imagine this case isn't even going to go to trial for 2 to 3 years. But nevertheless, it will be an interesting one. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. I've got some other cool videos. I'll do some follow-ups to JonBenet Ramsey. I originally did a long video on that. And I'm even going to tackle the JFK case, which obviously is a huge can of worms, but done quite a bit of research, so that should be interesting. So like and subscribe, and I hope to see you guys next time. Take care.